Three, two, one. This is Radio Days Africa 2021. Audio amplified. Download the Radio Days Africa app. Search Radio Days Africa in your app store.
Well, good morning. Welcome to today's session. I'm David O'Sullivan, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce an old friend, a colleague, and the most remarkable of broadcasters, given her wide range, her incredible versatility, the fabulous Sakina Kamwendo. Sakina, you're going to have to turn your camera on at some stage.
Well, okay. I thought I'd keep you in suspense for a little bit longer. Good morning, David, and good morning, everybody.
I love the fact that you've got your SAFM banner in the background, just a subtle reminder that you have just finished doing a TV show and you're about to go into a radio show. And this is 5 days a week, Sakina.
5 days a week, it's 3 a.m. start, and it's a long day, but I love what I do, so it really doesn't feel that bad.
Yeah, as long as you are enjoying what you're doing, as you say, it doesn't feel like work. But because you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, that is when I was doing breakfast on Kaya, I was waking up at 4:30. I was getting an extra hour and a half, and I was flat by the afternoon, by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What is it like for you? When do you actually, are you able to say to yourself after the radio show, I finished work?
Often not, because there's still so much else to be done. You know, it's a rewarding, wonderful career, but it's also rather precarious in that because we are independent contractors, we don't have the security that permanency in employment brings. So you're always hustling, you're always moving from one thing to the next, because as I say, you just don't have that security blanket.
Now, I've got my chat panel open, so if you do want to ask questions, please do so. Sakina and I will be able to see the questions coming up in the chat section. Tim's uncle tells me you can send voice notes as well, so do that. Tim will play the voice notes for us. And to remind you that Radio Days Africa is presented by the Wits Radio Academy under the auspices of the Department of Journalism. I hope you've been watching some of the presentations so far. 70 speakers over 21 sessions. And if you've downloaded the app, Radio Days Africa app, in the Play and Apple, just search for Radio Days Africa. You can find all the info. Or do what I've been doing, is going to radiodaysafrica.co.za, and you can listen back to the podcast in your own time. That's an easy way of doing things. Sakina, let us start. And I think I possibly was with you near the start of your career, certainly at a time when you decided this is a full-time career for me. But were you a maths teacher when you started dabbling in radio, producing and things like that at 702?
So I used to work for an organization called the Mathematics Center. And what we did is we used to, among other things, develop aids for teachers and trying to help them overcome all these great barriers they have in teaching mathematics, but also training teachers on how to teach mathematics, because it's one of those things. Even today, you'll find that the same problems exist. Teachers don't know how to teach fractions. Teachers don't know how to teach time. Children struggle with the same sort of concepts over and over again. But what we found was the problem was not only in terms of pedagogy of teaching, but also just simply gaps in content knowledge for a lot of teachers as well. So this is what we used to do. We used to go out and find schools that the department would usually contract us to do, and we would train the teachers and the departmental officials themselves as well in just how to teach mathematics.
So what was it about your life that prompted you to flirt with radio at that stage? Were you looking for a side hustle, or was there an itch that you needed to scratch?
It was definitely an itch. So at school, we had speech contests introduced when I was in standard 6, and I used to participate in that every year since inception. And had this wonderful record that I won every year. So that had become something that I'd really enjoyed, public speaking and just speaking in general, debating and that sort of thing. So I always kind of knew that whatever I would do going forward would involve that. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I had the opportunity to go into a courtroom, and I was expecting LA law, and it wasn't quite LA law, and it was very dull and boring. So I figured, no, maybe not. Maybe I just went in on the wrong day, wrong case. I don't know, but it did not move me at all, David. So I decided maybe not, maybe that's not it. And so for a while there, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do. And I stumbled across this mathematics thing because I just needed a job, and I got a job, and it was at the math center. But incidentally found that I actually knew more about what was going on than some of the people who were there, because I had done maths up until matric. So then I loved it. It was absolutely rewarding, because we still have a problem with mathematics teaching in this country. So it was very rewarding when you would try and teach someone something and suddenly the lights go on. Absolutely loved it. But I had a boss who, I think she kind of puts Cruella de Vil to shame. So, but I was actually thinking about her the other day. There was this very mean, vicious streak about her, but I don't think any other boss in my life has taught me as much as she did. I don't think anyone else has forced me to grow as much as she did. But ultimately, you know, those human interactions, those relationships become strained, and I just needed out of that space, not because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, but because I felt it was no longer serving me. But there was always that little bug, the broadcasting bug at the back. And I thought, well, maybe this was as good a time as any to make the move.
Now, tell me about that bug. How did you know about this bug? Where did the bug come from? What ignited what caused the spark of radio in you?
It must have been a conversation between John Robbie and Clive Rice one morning on the radio. Wow. Yes. And talking about cricket, and this was when John, I think, was still doing that 9 to midday slot way back when, you know, 702 was still on AM. And then that conversation really got my attention, and I felt myself getting so worked up. But besides that, I realized that, hey, I actually quite like what they're doing here. And that's where I really got drawn into talk radio. But because before that, I was very much into Metro FM music, and, you know, what was being done at Metro FM at the time, Bob Radio, if you could get there, because, you know, the signals were a problem unless you were in Gauteng visiting family. So then I figured, no, I actually kind of like this talk radio thing. And then I started listening.
Because quite a lot of people who start in radio as kids, and I'll talk from my own experience, we pretend we're on the radio. We imagine ourselves, and I went down that route of setting up my own little microphone and pretending I was a sports presenter. Did you have a childhood where radio appealed to you, or was it the seminal moment when you were much older as an adult and then listening to talk radio for the first time?
Radio always appealed to me. And I know this because my mom, I think for my 12th birthday, got me a little radio. I remember it so vividly. It was this little black radio rectangular thing, and it had honey written on it in pink. It was my most prized possession. So that was what I got for my 12th birthday, because I was always listening to the radio, whether it was Boetie gaan border toe, jy weet, people vra vir 'n geleentheid. I know I'm revealing my age kind of, but you know, these are the sort of things. I listen to just about anything and everything, David, but I used to love the radio.
Sakina, you got a break at 702. How did that come about? Assistance? Did you apply? Was there an advert? What happened?
There was no advert. It was sheer persistence. So I'd reached a point where I'd actually decided I am going to pursue this. I had the full-time job still going at the Math Center, but I wanted to get into radio. I'd identified radio specifically, and I had identified that I wanted to work for either Kaya FM or 702. I was very clear. I didn't even bother anywhere else. I knew where I wanted to be. And I contacted people, programming managers, and they said, bring us a demo tape. Took the time, went and had the demo tape done, dropped it off, nothing. Called, tried to follow up, nothing. And I did feel somewhat despondent for all of 1 minute. But then, I was back on. And I remember the question that I persistently asked myself: how badly do you want this? I asked myself that question every day. How badly do you want this? And every day that answer was bad enough. I really do want this. So I would drive to Kaya FM. They were still at Bolton Road in Rosebank, and call at 702, and just these doors just kept closing on me. And then one day at Kaya FM, I got a call, and I went through, and the programming manager, the guy who was the programming manager, said to me, yeah, so I've listened to this demo, and yeah, I think it's very interesting. But so what are you going to do for me? And yes. And I said, what are you going to do for me? What does that mean? And he says, yeah, don't be coy. Don't be silly. You know what I mean. We're all adults here. And I'm like, I'm not going to do anything for you. And left there. And strangely, David, I wasn't angry. I was just totally perplexed. I couldn't believe what had just happened. But I wasn't angry. I just kept it to myself, carried on. And then I had an opportunity to participate in Common Purpose, which is a leadership program. And we had Tim Modise come through, and one of the days we had Clem Santa, who was the chairman of Anglo American at the time. And we struck up because we had opportunity during this to engage with the panelists, and started a chat with Clem Santa. And, he asked, so what do you do? Spoke about that. And what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself? And I said, well, I actually want to have my own radio show. That's what I really want. That's where I really want to be. And he said to me, well, are you serious about it? I said, yes, I'm very serious about it. And at the time, Clem had written a book. He'd co-authored the book, Who Moved My Cheese, with Chantal Ilbery. And Chantal Ilbery, of course, the wife of Daryl Ilbery.
That's right.
Remember Daryl, he used to do weekend breakfast at 702. And so he said to me, hold on, I'll call you back in 5. We had exchanged numbers. So this is now fast forward a few days. I called Clem and I said, I thought about it and I really want to do this thing. So if you know anybody, if you can help me get a foot in the door, even if I have to make coffee, I'll do it. And he said, I'll call you back in 5. He calls me back in 5 indeed. He says to me, are you able to go to 702 on Saturday morning? I said, absolutely. This was a Thursday evening. I don't think Clem will remember this. I remember it vividly because it was important to me. And so that was a Thursday evening. I said, yes, I'll make it on Saturday. Gave me Daryl's number. I called Daryl. Daryl said, can you be here at like 5:30 on Saturday morning? I'm there. And I went just to shadow because, and bless his soul, Daryl and Andrew de Gouveia. You remember Andrew used to produce for Jet? Andrew was
produced for me. Yeah.
Yes. And he was still working with Daryl on a Saturday morning. So I went, shadowed, and Daryl asked me, so do you think this is what you want to do? I said, absolutely. He says, okay, will you come back tomorrow? I was like, yes. Sunday, went back, sat through it again, tried to do a little thing or two, help Andrew out. And afterwards he said to me, are you sure you want to do this? I said, absolutely. He said, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to send an email to Alan Matthews, and you send an email to him. This is his email address. I did, he did, and Alan called me up. And Alan, sneaky bugger, Alan then went on to quiz me about 702, which I of course knew cover to cover because I was such a fan and I was listening. And I remember him asking me about the US correspondent Connie Lawn at the time. Yeah,
Oh, yes.
and asking me, what would you do differently and all those sorts of things. But I think he gleamed enough to know that I really was interested and I really was paying attention. I knew the station. And he said to me, well, we really don't have anything. I said, well, I'm willing to just come and hang around and make coffee, just so I learn, the trade. I'll do anything. I'll make coffee, I said to him. And he said to me, Sakina, bless your soul, we really don't have anything. I said, okay, but if there's anything, please call me up. Lo and behold, I think it wasn't a week or two later, he called me and he said, we have a position open for a call screener, midnight to 4.
Oh,
yes. I didn't think about it. That wasn't it was like, I'm there. I didn't think twice about it. I had a husband, I had little kids, I had a full-time job. I took it and I went, call screen from midnight to 4. And then I wasn't there for too long, David, before they said, well, there's an opening, you want to produce something on the weekend, a word on, when you still used to have Dr. Platts and
Harry Seftel
and Harry Seftel, all of those guys. And I was like,
Andrew Levy, I remember all of them.
That's it, those days. And I said, I'll do it. So then I produced that show. And I started then producing the 3 to 6 show in the morning with Tola and Chinga.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is how it all progressed to the point where I was then asked, would you mind doing a little test for us? We just want to test what your voice sounds like on air. Like, okay, ultimately I want to get on air. And that's when there was an opening on your show for a traffic reporter.
Yeah, that's right.
And so ultimately my first big break was with you on your show.
I remember so clearly when you joined the show, I was doing afternoon drive. And as soon as you joined us, we felt we had the most overqualified traffic reporter going because you were so knowledgeable. You were so worldly wise. The fact that you were married, had kids, you had lived a life. And so you came with this big world experience. It just seemed traffic was a little too small for you, but you were a great personality. I loved interacting with you, and it came as no surprise when you said, I've outgrown this. And it was with no resentment. It was sad to see the back of you simply because you were such a great asset to the show, but it was almost inevitable that it would be a temporary position. I will go back slightly because I'm just curious on this Kaya situation where you were asked, what can you do for me? I know naming names is going to be difficult. Is that person in broadcasting?
I actually don't know. I know the person found their way to SABC some years back. And I actually, at the time when I saw them, he was like, go figure. So you're still around, but I really don't know. I've just not, kept any sort of tabs on them, but it's definitely someone who a few years back was still in the industry.
Sadly, I'm sure that there are a number of people watching this for whom that rings a bell. It is not uncommon, and it's not just broadcasting. In so many facets of life, there is this undertone of, or maybe it's or even more explicit, what can you do for me? Did that ever happen again in your career?
No.
But a good learning experience, and obviously one that you handled as well as you could under those circumstances. let us move away from that and talk about getting into radio. And I think the lessons we're learning here is it's persistence that is key, but it's also these chance meetings, isn't it? This chance meeting with Clem Sunter, making an impression with Clem Sunter. You think, had you not gone and engaged with him, how different your life might have been. Maybe there would have been another way into broadcasting, but that was the path you took. And also the accepting whatever comes your way. So if they're saying call screen for us between 12 and 4, you take that job. And I find in broadcasting, I get very angry with people, youngsters, who will come and say, I want to do your job. Can I come and shadow you and do your job? Maybe you can take Friday off and I can do your job. You think it's that easy? You've got to actually do the hard yards, and you did the hard yards. I'd also like to suggest that learning call screening in the early hours of the morning is the best place to do it, because that's where you're dealing with the crazies and the drunks and the fanatics, and you've got to control all of that. It's a good learning experience, isn't it? I think armed with all of that, you set yourself up perfectly. I would like to talk more about working on my show. However, I think it's only a blip in your career. After that, am I right? Did Metro come knocking on the door? Is that where you went to next?
Yeah, because I always had these on-air aspirations. And then I looked at this lineup at 7:02. There's John Robbie. And after John Robbie, it was Tim Modise. And then it was Jenny, David, Bruce. And I was like, I'm going to have to wait for these people to die for me to get a break.
That's right.
Because everybody at that point was at the top of their game. And I recognized that, listen, there's no scope for me here, not at the moment. And I recognize that if I really want to make it, to get to some form of on-air gig in the near future, I would have to leave 702.
I'm going to do that radio thing. Or do you do it on TV as well? Where you say, don't forget, send us your question chat box. And let me remind you as well that Radio Days Africa is sponsored by the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Media Program, Sub-Sahara Africa. It's a big title for a big organization with a big heart and big support. They've been a long-term partner and sponsor, and without their sponsorship, without their support, without their love for Radio Days possible. And it is also supported by the National Association of Broadcasters, Mediaheads 360, Wise Buddha Jingles, love that name, the US Embassy in Pretoria, thank you, Tiffany, if it is your game here, RCS Sound Software, Iono.fm, Samro, and podnews.net. Now, I find it appropriate that Metro should come knocking, given that when you were telling me as a youngster, you were listening to the radio, and things were starting to appeal to you. Metro was the first name that you gave. Was Metro your first love? Was Metro the first radio station that got you hooked?
No, because in the days when I started listening to the radio, there was no Metro FM. This was during apartheid South Africa,
Yeah.
and so there was no Metro FM. So when Metro FM happens, then it was something that obviously as a Black person you were drawn to, because it was new, it was exciting. It just brought all of these opportunities for those who were in that space at the moment, but also gave the rest of us that opportunity to live vicariously through them and imagine that we could do what they were doing. But Metro FM, so how I get to Metro FM, to the SABC, is when I made the decision that I needed to get to a different space where there may be more opportunities for me. Bob Mabena was still with Prime Media, and he was on the verge of leaving to come to the SABC. So I went to his office and I said to him, Bob, when you get to the SABC, please, these are my goals and aspirations. And if there's an opportunity, please give me a shout. And he promised that he would do that. Bob left Prime Media, came to the SABC. I, in the meantime, took my own initiative. I came for an interview here at SAFM, and I had never listened to SAFM when I came to the interview. And when they asked me, I was honest enough to say to them, I'd never listened to SAFM. and they still gave me the job. And I came in, they were still back at that time in the dungeon at Radio Park.
Yeah.
And I was there for 3 weeks. I just made the move, 3 weeks, and I got this call from Bob Mabena. And he asked me, where are you? And I said, no, I'm around. He says, well, I need to see you immediately. And I said, well, you'll be happy to know that I'm actually in the building. Where are you? He says, I'm on the 6th floor. I said, I'm in the dungeon. I'm coming up. And I took the lift. I went to the 6th floor. I found Bob Mabena, Leo Mane, and they said to me, listen, we have a problem. Our talk show is experiencing a bit of a problem. We have a producer who's leaving. We need help desperately, like yesterday. And I said, well, I've just started at SAFM. And they asked, how long have you been there? I was like, 3 weeks. I'll have you know, I walked out of that meeting with a resignation letter in hand. So it wasn't the best moment of my life, because all the way down, I'm thinking, what am I going to say to Dr. Snooki Zigalala, whom I had told of, how passionate I was about what I wanted to, how do I say, that, listen, thanks, but no thanks, I'm leaving 3 weeks later, 3 weeks, David. But
surely, clearly your gut spoke to you on that one, Sakina. Sorry to interrupt, because I find that as you're now launching yourself as a on-air presenter, you take what you can get. And SAFM at that stage, I know it's been through its ups and downs, but you would have been on a very good firm wicket, big transmitter network, and a great opportunity. What part of you said 3 weeks is too short? I can't give it up. What if Metro doesn't work? Was it a gut feel that Metro was your home and not SAFM?
It was, but also because I was once again upfront with Metro FM, with the guys, with Bob and Leo at that time. And I said to them, guys, I have on-air aspirations. I'm producing at the moment because I'm willing to pay my dues, but ultimately, this is where my journey is headed. And so we had agreed in that short meeting that, okay, should the presenter for any reason not be available, you would be the designated stand-in. So that was the clincher. So I was happy to hand in that resignation letter sheepishly, because I really felt bad about it. I really felt very bad. I think to this day, SABC still owes me about 800 Rand. I think that for pay as you earn and whatever else, pension fund, whatever monies. I have never cashed it because I never took it because I felt bad. I still feel bad about how I did SAFM at that point.
Maybe they're going to charge you. They're going to charge you 800 Rand rent for the room for this Radio Days Africa webinar.
No.
Sakina, I think there's an important lesson again here, in that you've got to go with your gut. You set your goals, you set your dreams, you know where you want to go, and if something is deviating and you feel you should be taking that path, you've got to go with what you've set for yourself. And you did exactly that. I can imagine that your heart was in your mouth, but I'm a big fan of gut feel. And if you knew instinctively Metro was the right way to go, as you say, sheepish, but happily you handed in your resignation. We'll move on to the Metro side, but we've got a voice note. So let's have a listen. Please send voice notes. You've been getting the number up on your screen as well. Send questions in the chat box. Some lovely things here. Marvin saying, I'd like to know, where did it all start? When will it end? We've done where did it start, Marvin. When will it end? I think it's going to be in the next century. Claire Louisa says, what? Did Sakina just drop a Kaya bomb? I made it sure that it's not a reflection on Kaya. It was a very, very long time ago.
Yeah.
And Shweshwe, my old producer, I admire you both, Sakina and David, best broadcasters I've worked with, but how you both managed to make radio sustainable. Well, probably you more than I have seen, as I'm now resting on my laurels. I've given up that now. I'm self-unemployed and happily retired from radio for now, you see. Let's have a listen to that voice note.
Good day, David and Sakina. This is Bongi from BMH Radio. This is for Sakina. Sakina, you've been doing this for years and years and have remained consistent, all the way. What battles did you have to fight and combat? And what do you think still needs to be done better or fixed in order to make the road easier for female broadcasters as it is easy for our male counterparts? Are we there yet where females are adequate enough in this space? Women are producers, are at the forefront, are executives in the space, but they're not allowed to make the important decisions in the board meetings, etc., etc. What still needs to be done to fix this, or are we there yet?
Sakina, very nice question. Thank you so much for that. All yours.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. At the moment, like it's always been, as a Black woman in particular, you are at the bottom of the pecking order. And that's just the truth of the situation. You are most dispensable in this industry as a Black woman. The men are at the top, white men in particular. Even today, as we talk about a transformed industry, the advertising agencies and where they decide to put their money, David, is still in the main where white men sit in this industry. So you have your white men, then you have Black men, then you have white women and Black women at the bottom of that order. And when changes are made, I'll tell you, a few years ago, big changes made in lineups here at the SABC. Who were the main people who suffered? It was Black women broadcasters. You are always first to go. If they need to chop, as a Black woman, your head is first on that chopping block. So you need to know that. Whatever everybody else does, you have to be 10 times better, work 10 times harder at it. And then, even then, you are still not enough. Not enough for them, not because we are not enough for the industry. And that is the truth today.
Such a disturbing reality that you've painted there, Sakina. I'm wondering to what extent it's a fault of radio management, because you made that very interesting observation, which I think is worth exploring, that the money goes where the white men are. And I'm wondering if the problem lies with the media houses, the buying agencies, that the people who are responsible for buying airtime on behalf of their clients are the ones who are blinkered, and their attitudes need to change, because if their attitudes are changed, naturally station managers' attitudes will start changing as well. As soon as people realize that the buying power rests with the Black women as much as it rests with white men, possibly we'll see attitudes changing. Do we need to talk to, does the ad industry, the media buyers, do they need to change?
They don't have to change at the moment, because you don't have an industry from the management at the stations going all the way down who make it necessary for them to change. So we don't have managers in the radio space at the moment. I don't know. I think this has to be, since I got into radio, the worst period for radio. We have these watchdogs who do the weirdest things, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be snobbish or to be someone who thinks they know it all, but David, there are still some basics that you need to adhere to. And there are people on the radio that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot barge pole, yet they are on the radio. Not only are they in radio, people walk off the street into a primetime radio show, and then you say to them, something went wrong and everything comes to a standstill. A deer caught in the headlights because they've not paid their dues. It's as simple as that. But it's because we don't have managers, and we don't have programming managers, more importantly, because they have become watchdogs. They are weak. They are people who are basically propelled into these positions from who knows where, and they are not radio. And I'm going to say that unapologetically. We still have the exceptions, but in the main, radio is in trouble.
Wow, I was rather hoping we had a situation where radio was starting to evolve. When I look at, for example, you having a primetime TV show and a top-rated radio show, and you've been doing it for years. And I look at talk radio in particular, I look at Power, I look at 702, and I see good, in fact, exceptional talent coming through on the airwaves. And I thought things are starting to move in the right direction. However, you paint a much more pessimistic view. Radio is actually in trouble, Sakina. Somebody has written here, you speak truth to power. I'm going to listen very carefully when you say things like that. And I'm glad you're ventilating it. You paint a very pessimistic view. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
Of course, there's light at the end of the tunnel, for as long as people are willing to be courageous and make the right decisions.
Yeah,
it's never a hopeless cause. You know, there's always a way to turn it around. But we've got to arrest all of the weird and wonderful foreign things that are happening. And that's different. It's not the same as evolution. I have nothing against evolution, things changing and going in a different trajectory. That is completely different. I'm talking about people who are killing this industry because you appoint influencers and you give them prime time shows. When last, do you still listen to the radio, David? Let me ask you that.
I listen to you and Mandy Wiener. And I have to say that since I have gone into my self-imposed exile from radio, I'm more of a podcast listener, but you are on during my school run, and that's about it. I certainly don't listen to people who are on the radio because of a Twitter following. I just, that's almost a protest on my behalf. I can't listen to that kind of radio. I want to listen to radio of substance delivered to me by people with substance, and you and Mandy are two of those people who deliver.
Well, thank you, David. And you know, the sincerity of it all. I find that I listen to, I can tell you, I listen to Radio 2000 quite a bit. I find I enjoy David Mashabela. You know, Robert Marawa's always been there for me. Like, that's something I would listen to. I listen to, and I found myself going back and I'm listening to John Perlman at the moment. But for a while there, I just found that as a radio person who listens to everything, I listen to student radio, I listen to community radio. People are always amazed at, how do you know this? I listen to everything because I love radio. And I've just found that I was listening to community radio more and more than I am listening to commercial radio, which is telling about the sort of things that I have mentioned. But maybe that's just me. I'm willing to accept that it's just me, and maybe everybody else feels that, you know, this is just the way things are going.
I feel like if I get through the next 5 minutes without rounding off your career, we kind of stopped at Metro. So I now need, I'm going to go on to the questions. We've got loads of lovely questions coming through, and we can expand on the conversation we've had. But I just need the executive summary. You were on Metro, you won loads of awards, and then was it SAFM after that?
Yes, it was. But I have to just reflect on my Metro days, because that was my heyday in radio. Those were the best days. Also, I think because I was basically allowed to do what I wanted to do with the necessary protection at the time when I started out. It wasn't easy because it was heightened political climate in the lead up to Polokwane in the ANC. And as you know, when things are happening in the ANC, they are reflected at the SABC, or at least they used to be, not so much anymore. And I can say that, you know, without fear of contradiction. But at that time, that was pretty much the situation. And I was allowed, thanks to people like Bob Mabena, like Leo Mane, who were there and understood what their roles were as managers, who provided that buffer, that protection, so that you could do your job. Subsequent to that, when they left, it became much more difficult. But and this is something that people don't know. The reason I left Metro, I love Metro. We had the biggest English talk show audience in the country. And we had just built this wonderful show on this wonderful platform, regular, passionate and enthusiastic listeners. And we had a wonderful thing going, which is where the awards came from, David. It was real, it was authentic. We went through many ups and downs on that show, but stood firm. Integrity carried us through. The reason I ultimately decided to leave Metro was it had gotten to a point where the show had become a victim of its own popularity. So everybody wanted to be on the show. And this one day, there was a certain doctor, somebody who wanted to be on the show. And because the show was so popular, it was chock-a-block. We had like these long running spot breaks, and it was just a mess. But the show was that popular. And then certain doctor, somebody wanted to be on the show. And we had made a decision that if anybody wanted to be on the show, because we could, they had to pay for the time, the airtime, because we could demand it. Doctor, somebody came and said, I want to be on Metro FM Talk with Sakina and this, that, and the other. And I said, well, Dr. So-and-so, this is how you do it. This is the procedure. Go via sales. They will help you, and then they will schedule it and it will happen. Dr. So-and-so didn't like my answer. Dr. So-and-so clearly had connections, went to the top of the SABC board, right to the top, chairperson. Got a letter, email, and I was told, listen, can you please create an opening, schedule a space for Dr. So-and-so? And I was like, no. I stand by my response. This is how it is done. If Dr. So-and-so wants to be on this show, this is how they need to go about it. Management is at this point pleading with me, David, Sakina, please just give Dr. So-and-so, because this is now coming from board level. And I was like, no, it's not going to happen. This is what we had agreed upon. This is how it's done. So no, okay, please just say something. I said, no, okay, why don't you tell Dr. So-and-so to tell you when he wants to be on? No, but I said, no, ask doctor. And they said, okay, Dr. So-and-so, when do you think? He gave a date. And I said, well, please note that I will not be available to do the show on that day. I'm not coming. There most probably will not be anything wrong with me. I simply will not be reporting for work on that day. And I didn't. And the doctor was on the show and it happened. And that for me was that moment where I knew I needed to go.
Did that happen before that there was pressure put on you? Because there was a time at the SABC. Explain.
Yeah, I went through quite a bit. I remember the one more famous, or should I say infamous moment, was when I had the 3 editors in the lead up to the Mangaung conference of the ANC.
Oh, yes.
And they were in studio. And then I was told, okay, I need to tell them that there was something wrong because they are not going on air. And I said, absolutely not. I will not lie to my listeners. And I was told, go and say that there is a technical problem. And I said, I will not say it. There's no technical problem here. And that show was pulled, but I did not lie to my listeners. And that's the one thing today. And I've always said, the only thing I need to walk out of this SABC with, or any place that I work at, is my integrity. That's the only thing I need to walk out with.
Absolutely. I think for anybody getting involved in radio, you've made a very critical point there, that what you've got to trade with is your reputation. You can have looks and good voices and things like that, but if you don't have a reputation, if you don't have integrity, if you don't have trustworthiness, you can't do this job. Nobody will actually listen to you. Which came first, the editor's controversy or Dr. So-and-so? And can you remember Dr. So-and-so's name, or are you just being...
I do remember Dr.
cautious?
So-and-so. This is the book that I'll write when I'm 60, 70 years old.
That's
So
a long time away. We want
No.
name names. No, I won't pressure you into that.
You
But
know,
which came first? Which of those two incidents?
it was definitely the editors, but before that I had, and what was the thing that upset me about that, David, was the lies that were told subsequently, where, and incidentally, those people are no longer at the SABC. They went on, called a press conference the next day and said, well, I did not receive permission from the SABC, which was a bold-faced lie. And I called them and I said, but that is a lie, because I called the political editor at the time to be part of this conversation. The political editor knew exactly what was happening, and they had declined to participate because they had something else going. And I said, if you want to know, that was, as I said, in the lead up to the Mangaung conference, I bumped into the political editor, the politics editor at Luthuli House, where we had to go and get our accreditation. So there was so much lies being told. And at that point, I had to make a decision. I needed to decide whether I still wanted to be at the SABC. And I decided that I did, and that I needed to find a way to fight my battles.
Why did you think that leaving Metro would solve the problem rather than leaving the SABC? Because obviously the instruction was coming from up on high. No matter where you go within the SABC, that chain would still be above you. What made you stay under the umbrella of the SABC?
The thing that made me stay under the umbrella of the SABC was because, for me, I have always been about public service broadcasting, and which is still what I do today. It's not about the money. If it was about the money, trust and believe, I would not be sitting at SAFM. Because there have been offers to go elsewhere for more money. For me, it's about that service to the public and understanding, because I think many people don't understand, including some of our parliamentarians, what it means, what public service broadcasting means, and what it entailed. So that's the reason I stayed. And the reason I left the Metro FM platform was because it was the platform that was so powerful that had become a problem. It was way too powerful. I always said I had the biggest ANC branch in the country on that show.
Tell me, in fact, before we do that, I'm going to ask you about Protect Me From Myself, that fabulous moment, which you handled with such aplomb. We've got another voice note. Let's have a listen to this voice note.
Greetings, everyone, and special greetings to Ms. Sakina. I just joined the webinar now. I just want to say, Sakina, I see you, my sister, and I see myself in you. And I'm coming. It's only a matter of time. Talk radio, factual radio is the future, because our people need information. Thank you so much, and keep that smile. Love it when you interrogate them and they get all wet up and you just smile. Keep it going. Yeah, sister.
Thank you very much. That sounded like a message of praise.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And, David, ultimately, this is what it's about. I don't get out of bed. I don't do this for fame. I don't do it for fortune, as I say. I could be elsewhere if that was the case. For me, it's about the people. That is what it is about. It's about listeners on TV. It's about viewers. It's about being of service to them. That's why I do it.
There's a question from Isak Minar saying, Sakina, please tell us about your broadcasts from the Polokwane ANC conference, where Zuma was elected ANC president. The political dramas, late nights, long drives, doing obies in the rain and mud. Oh, I was doing 702 in those days. That was a crazy time, where I remember so well Joel Netchitenzi saying to us, don't worry, Tabu and Becky put it in the bag. Don't worry about a thing.
Yes. David, such beautiful memories. Hi, Isak, good to hear from you. And, you know, as Isak says, it was raining. So there we had these shoes coming up and, you know, I had to go and buy shoes, I remember, because it was just so miserable, muddy where the studios were. And then the SABC had this marquee next to the main marquee where we had set up like a broadcast center. And you speak of Joel Nechitenze, I bump into this group of Saki Matlozoma, Mohammed Vali Musa, you know, all those guys. And I say to them, guys, so what do you think is going to happen? Because the Zuma camp say they have it in the bag and they showed me the numbers. They say, no, like they said, like Joel said to you, we've got it in the bag. Listen, that night when, and Isak speaks about, you know, the broadcast, the long nights. I was on air that night when the election took place. And when I got out, there was nobody there, David. Everybody had left. But it was also a very seminal moment for me in terms of broadcasting. There were very few people left in that SABC marquee, which is also why I've stayed the course at the SABC, because there was something wrong in people, journalists, crying because someone had lost an ANC elective conference. Now, and I remember saying, I don't understand this because it makes no material difference to my life, whether it's Jacob Zuma or Thabo Mbeki. It's ANC president, yeah, they become the president of the country. And yes, I fully understand and get how that impacts on my life. But materially, as a broadcaster, in terms of my day-to-day living, how does one of them becoming the president induce me to tears as a broadcaster,
as a journalist? Yeah,
and
it does make a jot in your journalist life.
And that for me was one of those aha moments. You know, it was an epiphany, and I realized there needs to be another side here. Someone needs to, maybe I was, you know, overthinking it, but I thought I had a job to do because this cannot be it.
For the SAFM studio, Jeremy Maggs was doing the breakfast show. I was doing breakfast and afternoon on 702, which was a little insane. And because nobody was around that next day, and anybody, and you couldn't get anybody in the morning because people had such bad hangovers that either drunk themselves in sorrow or drunk in celebration. And the rare person that was around, I had this agreement with Jeremy Maggs, we'd send our guests to the other studio. So there was the sight of guests walking from studio to studio across the muddy field. It was insane that day. Let us go to Sally. Sally Sitole from BMH Radio. I'm going to leave your question to last because it's a beautiful one to wrap up with. Claire saying you've always spoken truth to power, even if it was to the leaders in our own organization. Claire Mawisa, by the way, everybody. So you're dealing with a big broadcaster here. And it potentially could be career limiting for you. Were you ever intimidated or afraid?
Never afraid. You know, there's that saying, courage is not the absence of fear. It's just the realization that something else is more important than your fear. Intimidated, yes, people have tried, maybe on some occasions, somewhat successfully, but never afraid really. So I remember there was a time here at the SABC when I was persona non grata. People did not want to be seen with me, David. They simply would disappear into corners and take short lefts and short rights when I came around. And I don't blame them for it because everybody at that time thought that Hlaudi Motsoeneng hated me. And so they didn't want to be seen with me. And again, you know, the things we go through, you arrive and during that crazy time, you would get these ludicrous instructions. You are not to do A, B, C, D. Don't take this, don't do that. And I would, not as an act of defiance, but I always, and this is the only way I survived at the SABC, familiarize myself with the editorial policy And my answer would always be as such, as per the SABC's editorial policy, A, B, C, D. And I think that's the only reason I'm still here.
It's appropriate that I go to our next person, a man who's now hosting the afternoon show on 702, because he too was at the forefront of intimidation at the SABC. It is John Perlman. Hey, John. Camera on, mic on.
I'm trying.
We got your voice, John. That's fine.
Yeah, face for radio.
Good to chat to you and welcome, John.
Yes, I must say, it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. I don't know if this is quality control. There we go. I don't look that bad. Yeah. Hi, David. Hi, Sakina. Afternoon, everyone else.
Hello, John.
Good to see you, John. Good to see you.
Yeah.
I would presume this conversation is familiar to you about intimidation at the SABC.
Yes, it is. And I've been listening with great admiration to what Sakina has been saying about her experience. It's tough there. I think the thing that keeps people attached to the SABC, and I was always asked by younger journalists, would I recommend they go to the SABC? And I would say absolutely yes, you must, because SABC fundamentally gave me my significant start in radio. But I think the diversity and richness of the place and the extraordinary range of reach, if you take into account the fact that they broadcast in every single language, just made it a remarkable place to work in the 90s, and long may that continue for all its downside. An absolute national treasure, and we all need to play our part shining it up.
You got a question for Sakina at all, John?
Actually, I've been told I must ask you questions. The boot is now on the other foot.
Okay.
And Sakina will stick around and I'm sure ask you some questions. But let me get straight into it because time is not particularly our friend. David O'Sullivan, if you'd been at Nkandla on Sunday and you had one question to ask President Jacob Zuma, what would you have asked?
You see, I'm not expecting this. I'm expecting to be the person asking questions. This is from left field. I would be asking the journalists, why on earth are you? I'm going to be asking other journalists, why on earth are you giving Carl Niehaus so much airtime? Why aren't you correcting the fake news? Why aren't you challenging the nonsense? Because I didn't want poor old Tim's uncle having to bleep what I really do want to say. Why aren't you challenging what is being said? Have you read the judgments? Have you understood the process of contempt of court? Do you understand where the nonsense is coming from with the fake news? And why are you not doing your jobs properly? I don't know if that's really where you wanted me to go, John. Who's my interviewee?
Yeah, you're raising a really interesting point. Tell me about you in your many, many years in journalism and press conferences. I mean, they are a funny sort of area of journalistic work because on the one hand, you're not going to get anything that's particularly exclusive because there's so many other people there. Did you always kind of keep your best stuff for the minister? Could I just grab you for a minute and not, because there's become a little bit of a culture, I think, where people want to be in press conferences have become very showy in my view. And you get people, and I would name someone like Gwede Mantashe as someone who, when he was SG at the ANC, very much played that space. And I sometimes wondered if journalists got very much lost in the theatre. Were you the catch the guy in the parking lot sort of fellow?
I definitely was. It would always be, I talk to you, and at the doorstop, I would either before or after, but I'd always keep my powder dry. I didn't want anybody getting my sound bite or understanding my perspective at all. And I find it, the way of doing news conferences really odd. And I would rebel completely if I was a journalist going to news conferences where they say, let's take 6 questions, they get written down, and then those 6 questions. So where's your opportunity for a follow-up? I think the better way was to then point to people in the room. I also found that that issue of people asking questions in news conferences tended to be very much a show-off thing. When I used to be the journalist in the field, it was always Kevin Dunn from ITV and James Robbins from the BBC asking the first question, and it was almost inevitable. It was kind of like a competition between the two of them. And I felt that it was grandstanding more than anything else. I'm never a big fan of news conferences. I understand it helps the person who's giving the news conference to get the media in one bite. But I think that I think journalists should rebel and say, we're not doing this way of 6 questions, now another 6 in any way. I remember news conference, the only person you couldn't doorstop was Nelson Mandela. And I remember his news conferences were particularly difficult because, and I always get pushback from people on this one who weren't there, he was very grumpy. He was always grumpy, and he didn't have any qualms about tearing a strip off you if he didn't like the way your question. And he wagged his finger. There was a big finger wag. I remember one quick story. John Harrison was a BBC correspondent, very sadly killed in the aftermath of the Avia Bear raid in Bophuthatswana. He was racing to a feed point and he had a car accident, was killed. But John Harrison was a very big man, and he used to stand next to his cameraman and ask questions. And he asked Nelson Mandela a question one day, and Nelson Mandela took exception to this question. And he said, "Young man, what you need to understand, young man," and he was berating John, and on he went. And it was starting to become awkward and embarrassing. And he carried on, and eventually the tirade had finished, and there was this terrible awkward silence. And John Harrison said, "Thank you, Mr. Mandela, for the reference to young." And the place erupted in laughter. Mandela's big smile came out, and the whole situation was diffused.
So David, I want to go back to when you were much younger. Do you have any memory of the first big news event manifesting in your world? And it might have been parents listening to the radio, family members coming round and saying, "Have you heard?" and fill in the blank has just happened. Is there any memory that sits with you about the first awakening of, this is news, and maybe me, David O'Sullivan, might want to be part of that?
Well, possibly not realizing it was news, but I'll tell you where I was first aware of a big incident. I was 3 years old, and only because I remembered that I was so concerned about who's next, that the person who was coming next was evil. And when I think back at that, I just chatted to my father years and years ago, and I said, "You remember this particular time?" And he thought about it, and he said, "Oh, that would have been the assassination of Hendrik Verwoerd." Because my father, while he celebrated the death of Verwoerd, he was more concerned about B.J. Vorster coming to power. And I went, "Oh my God," I just remember as a kid, there's this in the back of my brain, I was terribly concerned about an evil man coming into my life. And the first big story I was aware of that I took on board, I was still a little IT, where my mother said he's going to be a journalist one day, was the first heart transplant by Chris Barnard on
late 60s.
So that's also in the 1960s. Then a big event, I remember driving. I grew up in Edenvale, and my mom was taking me to there was a bookshop in Rosebank called the Children's Bookshop, and she was driving me there to go and buy a book. And we were driving on the fringes of Alex, and we came across these burning barricades, and the police said, "Turn around." And all I wanted to do was stay and find out what was going on. And it was June the 16th, 1976. And
Amazing.
I used to drive to my father, who's now passed away. He lived in an old age home in Modderfontein. I used to drive on that road, and I could not ever pass that point without thinking, wow, this is where I first experienced the 76 uprising. But my mother knew, he's going to be a journalist one day, because I wanted to stay. No, let's not turn around. Let's watch what's happening.
Yes. So I want to ask you about your journalistic style, David. I've spoken to a few people in preparation for our chat, people who've produced you, and that would be a large number, so no one's incriminated here. But you are perceived as very cool and calm, somebody who doesn't get flustered. but if I could just add a little bit of myself, and I sometimes tell people I work with, I have never stopped being scared. So if you see me throwing my hands in the air, like, what on earth are we doing next? It's not because I'm angry, because I still, at some fundamental level, remain nervous, scared of dead air, scared of not knowing where to go. Have you stayed scared throughout your career, or have you reached a place of Zen? And if so, could you please give me the address?
I don't think I've been nervous, but I've never been scared. I rely on the fact that I can talk the hind leg off a donkey. In fact,
Yes.
as Sakina and I were getting ready, and Tim's uncle said, if there's any dead air, or because Sakina was worried that her connection wouldn't hold, I said, don't worry, I'll just talk. And I think all my producers would know that I would just
Yes.
grab a newspaper and then blah, 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 blah. I know it's not a great skill to have, to be able to just talk rubbish for 5 minutes, but I
Yes.
can. So I've never been scared of that. I don't know. I love the surge of adrenaline. I love waking up in the morning and knowing that there's a big interview I'm going to do, or if it's an interview I've done, I've recorded, or if it's a podcast that I've made. I love the excitement of, I'm going to be telling people this story. So I've never had fear, but I've always had great excitement. And I don't think I've ever lost the sense of adrenaline walking
Yes.
into the studio. And I feel that if ever I walked in and felt, I got this, I've done it so many times. It's now, I've worked out in February, from when I did my very first radio show, it was 40 years. And I was
Wow.
glad that I was at Kaya. I worked at Rhodes Music Radio, and 40 years later, I was on Kaya FM doing the breakfast show, and I played the same song, which was Stevie Wonder's Master Blaster. But in that time, I felt that if I've never not felt a little surge of adrenaline as the microphone goes on. I thought if I ever lost that surge of adrenaline,
Yes.
then it would be time to stop.
David, is there an interview that you have, I wouldn't say haunt you, because you don't strike me as I'm haunted by sort of guy, but is there an interview that you wish you could have a do-over, that you, for some reason, you just, and I think everybody at whatever level of broadcasting they've been in will think, I wish I'd asked that, or I wish I hadn't let them get away with the other thing. Anyone that particularly sticks on that?
There are two, and I'll be quick with the first one. We were broadcasting from outside Parliament. It was the budget. My worst experiences, I hated the budget because it had just been delivered. There was no time to digest it, and immediately the minister would be in front of you, and you had to ask sensible questions. And I remember I hadn't done the greatest job in making sense of what I should prioritize. And the next thing, Pravin Gordhan was sitting in front of me, and he was a no-nonsense bloke. And I decided, yes, still is. And I could see he was harassed and he was in a bad mood. And I thought, let me dissipate the mood by asking a light question. And I said, oh dear Minister, I'm sure you've got all your cabinet colleagues now knocking on the door with begging bowls. And he just stared at me. He said, let me get into what I'm doing here. And he went through his laundry list of things and he left. I thought, I really could have asked a better question. But I'll tell you the one that I really regret. In 1986, I was working at Capital Radio, and a guy I was with there, James Lorimer, who's now an MP. He and I decided to do a program on the 10th anniversary of the Soweto uprising. And one of the people who gave the order to open fire was Brigadier Tienis Roy-Swanepoel, one of the great devils of apartheid South Africa. He tortured many, many political activists. He was evil personified. You think that Eugene de Kock was bad? This man was the epitome of evil. And he kept a very low media profile because he didn't have to have one. But he stood for Parliament. In those days, we had the representation where you actually voted for an MP in your area.
Right. Constituencies.
And I was living in West Dean, and Puk Botha was the incumbent as the foreign affairs minister as well. So he was the National Party man. And for the Conservative Party, up pops Roy-Swanepoel. So we had a phone number for him. And I phoned him up and I said, look, could I interview you about the Soweto uprising? And he said, no, I do not talk to you about that. If you want to ask me about Parliament and running for Parliament, I'm happy to do the interview. I said, no, it was about Soweto. He said, no, I'm not doing it. But I saw that he lived on a farm called Katima Molilo, which is in the Caprivi Strip, and I'd been there.
Yes.
So I said to him, why have you named your farm Katima Molilo? Because I've been there. And he was quiet for a second. He said, and then he tested me. He said, did you go to the toilet, the special outdoor toilet? And I knew what he was referring to. There was a toilet in a baobab. And I said,
Yes.
the one in the baobab tree. Yes, I went to that toilet because you had to go to the toilet in the baobab tree. And he listened to my answer. He said, you can come Thursday, 2 o'clock or whatever it was. And so we got the interview. So when we got there, I'd left my microphone behind. And so I used what was then called a condenser microphone on my tape recorder. So the quality was terrible. But at the time, we didn't know that this was the chief torturer. That wasn't clear to white South Africans. And so I missed an entire line of questioning of Roy Riswanepoel, who rarely gave interviews. And there I had him sitting in front of me. He did give us an immortal quote, if I had to, talking about Soweto 76, if I had to do it again, I would do it again. I have no regrets. Those people had to die. And I've got that interview on a reel-to-reel tape. I'm pointing over there because it's in my cupboard at the back there. And I haven't listened to it again because I'm too embarrassed about the sound quality. So my do-over would be Teens Roy Riswanepoel.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to sort of have a panel with him and Praveen Gordon. I wonder how that would go. And
I wouldn't moderate that.
Chair that. Yeah. But tell me this, David. I'm very, very interested in what you said, your archive, because I think people have hugely over the years enjoyed your real grasp of history, the long timelines over which you understand stories, and very much delivered with the flavor of the sense that you were there for those moments of great history. Is it? I know it's in your cabinet behind you. But is a lot of it in your head, or are you also like the rest? Well, certainly like me. Have you become a click guy where, while, for example, a caller's talking, you clicking to find out who actually scored the winning try in that particular rugby match, or is it all in the O'Sullivan archive?
There's a fair amount in my head, but I often worry about the veracity of my memory. I realize that memory is quite
Corrupted
fallible.
files.
Yeah, so I sometimes wonder, have I actually thought of it correctly? I remember once, this was nothing to do with journalism, but illustrates my point. I was going to Ellis Park with some mates, and we witnessed a hit run right outside the stadium in the pouring rain, and a big bloke had been knocked over and was now lying in the gutter, and water was pooling around him, and he was starting to drown. And my friend and I managed to roll him out, and we gave statements to the police. The guys who hit him got caught. Nothing came of a criminal trial. 3 years later, there was a civil case, and his lawyers said, could we redo our statements? Now, we relived that moment every time we went to Ellis Park. We'd talk about it. The second time I had to make a statement, the lawyers came back to me and said, we can't use your statement. There are too many differences of material fact. I said, there can't be. This has been a part of in my head for the past 3 years. I'd left out the whole section about it raining and him lying in the gutter, which was fundamental to the story. And I thought, how could I have left such an important part out? And years, in fact, the other week, I was chatting to the mate I was with at the time, and I told him the story. I said, you remember we were at that hit and run? And he said, what hit and run? So he'd completely forgotten the whole thing. But the incidents where I've got a cassette recording of it, then I can play it over because I can hear myself, I can hear my voice, and I can replay those. And it's always the flashbulb memories. Those are the cassettes I always kept, the big ones. I had interviews with Chris Harney, and those will always stand out, and I always kept those interviews. So there, I feel my memory's pretty cool.
David, you took a detour into law. I don't know if I should call it a detour. Maybe it was just a particularly scenic or otherwise part of the same journey, but you'll tell us. Did you hanker for journalism during that time, or did you immerse yourself sufficiently in law to think maybe this could be what I want to do?
No, so the reason I did it was because in the 80s, we were subject to so many restrictions in terms of the emergency regulations and statutory legislation. There was the Internal Security Act, Prisons Act, Police Act, you name it, that restricted the media. And I always felt that the lawyers were too conservative in their interpretation. And I felt that I needed to study law to understand how journalists get around these terrible restrictions. So in 1991, I took myself back to university. I was 29, and I'd made enough money as a foreign correspondent working for foreign radio stations based in South Africa to put myself through varsity, and with the sole aim of becoming this championing human rights lawyer. And as I started studying, what did they start doing? They started repealing all that legislation, effectively.
Well, they knew you were coming.
Yeah, they saw it. They saw me coming and they thwarted me. And because I'd started doing my articles at Webber Wentzel in their media law department, working for the Star, Sowetan, Pretoria News and Carte Blanche. I also freelanced at 702 reading the news. So I never stopped being on the radio. And in fact, the two biggest stories that I ever did were actually while I was an article clerk working at freelancing. I did the Bishu massacre, which was during my September holidays from university. I should have been studying, and I decided on a whim to go down to Bishu and got the biggest story of my life. And also I was on the news desk on New Year's Day when Chris Hani was assassinated, and the lady over the road phoned me and told me what had happened as it was happening. Her husband, as she described it, her husband had jumped over the fence and I was trying to revive him. This obviously wasn't on air, but I then had to sit on the story for an hour while I waited for a journalist to go to the scene at Dawn Park to confirm it. So I stayed in journalism, and it was when Webber Wentzel asked me to write cease and desist letters to Chinese traders to stop them selling fake Levi jeans, which felt like I was just being a big bully for an American corporate. Chris Gibbons phoned me and said, "Are you sure you want to do this law lot? Don't you want to come and join us full time?" I resigned that very day, John, without exaggeration. I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And I threw it all in. And I didn't care. It might have been unfinished business, but I was paying. I was in control of my own destiny. And in 4 years, I learned all I felt I wanted to from law.
Interesting. And David, let's go back to the nuts and bolts of the business. I think you and I are similar in one sense. I think we both come in roughly an hour and a half before the show starts. I know that would have been tricky at 702 because you would have had to go very quietly to get past John Robbie in his sleeping bag, who was there in preparation for the show the next day. He was a completely different animal, as I understand it, in terms of preparation. David, my screen shows you not there. I just want to confirm, are you still there? Okay, David is gone. I'm here, and I am, at the moment, talking to myself. Let's see if we can get David back. Hi, Sakina. Save my bacon. Unmute your mic, please. Are you muted?
There I am. So
great. Yeah. So, I mean, it was lovely hearing about so much about the journey that you've been on, and maybe the same question for you, but framed slightly differently. I mean, you must get this quite often, where people say to you, "I want to get into radio," and they kind of have this view of a radio is something you sort of get in on the 5th or 6th floor, whereas there's actually the ground floor. How much? I see David is back. Let me finish the question with Sakina. Your preparation style, are you an early bird, hours and hours before, or is it all percolating in your head as you drive towards Auckland Park?
It's definitely percolating because I would rather go to sleep knowing what needs to happen. So I get greater comfort from that. So by the time I get there, I kind of know where I want to take this, what I want. But it's still nerve-wracking. And I was listening to both you and David talk about that. And this is something people don't understand, that even David, you said 40 years. I was reminded this year that I've been in this business for 20 years. and I didn't even realize, but still the nerves every time before you go on, it's still there. And you're right, when you stop feeling that, give it up.
Yeah. Stay with us, Sakina, because I'd like to hear more about that from you. But David, lots of preparation before you go, or do you leave a nice big space open in your head to say, okay, let's see what happens. I'm not gonna weigh myself down with lots of notes, lots of data.
Yeah. So when people say how long does it take to prepare for a show, I say it takes 40 years.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of accumulated institutional knowledge that you bring to bear. So I then can leave those gaps, knowing that I have the confidence to fill the hole should it come. So if listeners are throwing questions at me, I know that I'll be able to handle it. If I don't know the answer, I'm just going to say I don't know the answer. And the beautiful thing of Google is, and with great producers, you can come up with answers quite quickly, or they can find somebody who's got the answer.
Yeah.
But what I was doing, if I was doing the afternoon drive show, I'd always be listening to the morning show and then keeping abreast with the news. When I was at Kaya and doing the morning show, well, when you were with me at Kaya, I would listen to you to see how you had set the tone, how you'd wrapped up the day, to make sure that there was continuity when I went forward. And often there would be interviews that you had done that were so relevant to us, and we knew we weren't going to get that guest again, or the angle that you'd taken that we couldn't, that nobody else was taking, because you have that uniqueness of spotting, asking the question nobody else is asking. We could then replay a section of that interview. So it's really keeping up to speed with what else is happening on your radio station to make sure the momentum is being kept, and keeping abreast of the news for talk radio, and knowing a lot about a lot. So you and I share a great passion for sport. I will always be ready to go with anything sport related. I probably wouldn't be so attuned to pop culture. It's just not stuff that's relevant to me. But yeah,
I had you down as a kind of club scene guy, but obviously I've misjudged you over many years.
In the 80s, and I'm sure you were there as well, where I used to hang out at all the clubs, Jamison's, King of Clubs, Dawson's, Rumors. I jawled excessively in the 80s and 90s.
David, you spoke about your love of sports. What's the word? The universe said, we're going to give you a rerun on your life. You can cover the 94 election, or you can cover the 95 World Cup, but you can't do both.
Can I have the 96 Olympic Games?
Okay.
Yeah, then it's
okay. Let's do that. 96 Olympic Games, Atlanta.
Yeah.
Okay. 96 Olympic Games, 94 election. Which would you do?
Oh, geez. No, it's 96. It's the Olympics. It's because it's Penny Haynes getting her gold medals, and it's our first gold medals. Mm-hmm. It's Ezekiel Sepeng getting his silver medal against all odds. It's Marianne Kriel getting her bronze, completely unexpected. And the pinnacle, one of my greatest days of my journalistic life, is being at the Olympic Stadium and watching Josiah Tugwani come in and win the marathon gold medal, because I'd been telling everybody he was going to win it. I'd followed the Olympic marathon team. I knew them, and they had said, of all of us, there were 4 of them, 3 ran. Lawrence Pugh was the reserve. He didn't run. And in fact, Lawrence Pugh, when they had chosen the 3 who had run, Lawrence Pugh was sent to Europe to go and run in Europe. And at the last second, Kolile Yawa got a stress fracture, and they phoned him at the airport and said, get back here, you're in the team.
Yeah.
He walked away, his plane took off and blew up in the air. It was the TWA plane so Lawrence Pugh would have died in that plane.
Yes.
It had not been for Kolile Yawa. And they said they were having a tactic, surround them with green. So they were all wearing green. And if anybody broke away, the 3 of them would run that person back into the pack. And that started happening. And then whoever was strongest, closer to the end, would break away. And they all said, it'll be Jossie, as they called Josiah Tugwani, Jossie. So I was saying, Tugwani will win the marathon. And he won the marathon. And it was just one of the best days, just to see this little figure, our guy, running into the stadium, was the most phenomenal sight. And so while 94 was extraordinary, it became the same thing over and over again, watching this miracle taking place. But the Olympic Games, 12 days of glory, I just watched South Africa's flag flying so high constantly.
Fantastic. And David, you know, people know and respect and celebrate what you've given to radio. What has radio given you?
Oh, John, it's just given me the best life. I don't think, now that I'm able to sit back and I'm not on radio anymore, and I choose not to be, I really will take a very long break, and it may be permanent, I don't know, but right now it feels like it needs to be. I can reflect on the fact that this has just been the best life I could have. And when people say, complain about the job and, oh, I'm so tired, I've worked long hours, like, you haven't actually worked. That's not working. Go and dig trenches for a living. Go and sell fruit and veg at a hawker's stand day in and day out. Go and be a lawyer, where it is back-breaking, tedious, time-consuming, pressured work. Try those for a change. But talking on the radio, interviewing people, being on camera, because I worked for 11 years doing SABC Sport, it has never been a chore. It has always been the best life. And I think what radio has done for me is it's made me appreciate what hard work really feels like. And I feel I flirted with that as a lawyer, but it's also given me an opportunity to be an opinion shaper. It's given me a sphere of influence. And at the same time, it's allowed me to have the greatest amount of fun doing all of that.
And just, I suppose, people would look to you as somebody who they've learned things from. Is there anyone who you could say, I learned from many people, but I've never learned as much as I have from, fill in the blank, if indeed you can fill it with one name?
I learned a lot from Gary Edwards, who was at 702 when I first joined, who taught me the adage, match the mood, and I've used it constantly. What kind of program we're going to do today? Match the mood. When I went on air just shortly after we heard that Nelson Mandela had passed away, and I thought, I have no idea what's going to happen here. And we crossed to his home in Houghton. I heard people singing and celebrating. I went, oh, okay, there's the mood, match the mood. When I worked at Capital Radio, there was a wonderful man called Julian Potter, who was a trailblazer, pioneer of journalism, radio journalism at the SABC, and he set up the newsroom at Capital Radio. He taught me a lot, as did a man called Zahed Kachalia from the famous Kachalia family. He's now a big shot at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I learned a lot from him. Then there was a guy who taught me that you could do news and sport. You didn't have to do one or the other. His name was John Perlman, and I followed him. I thought that his blend of news and sport was absolutely correct.
And just finally, I mean, you and Sakina had an interesting conversation about the state of radio at the moment. I must admit, I'm quite enthralled by new voices and new talents that I hear all the time. And if I could extend that to broadcasting, into television, I find really exciting younger talent all over the place. But going forward, and let's just talk about radio in general. It's an industry you love, and in that spirit of love, what do you want to see radio do more of, and what do you want to see radio perhaps do a lot less of than we're doing now? What targets would you set for us as an industry?
I would like to see more interrogation and much better preparation by the journalist. I really do get incensed when people mouth off on radio without being properly challenged. So I feel that there's a level of professionalism that has been lost. Sakina, I mentioned to Sakina the fact that she came into broadcasting as a worldly person with kids. Now, I'm not saying you have to be married, you have to have children in order to do this job. I'm saying, though, you cannot come in with no life experience. We do need people with life experience so that they are able to cut through the rubbish and spot it. I am also encouraged by the people who are coming through. And while Sakina has got a very bleak view, I love to see the rise of people like Kathy Moklaklana, for example, on SAFM and on television. I think people of her caliber are setting the goal, or setting the bar. I look at the people I worked with at Kaya, who were just magnificent young people coming through. Mbali Dlamini, Katlego Sokoto. I'm going to leave people out, but there's fabulous talent at Kaya FM. A guy called DJ Keys as a producer. These are young people at the start of their career, and I look at them and I said to them, "You guys are all the future of radio." I think it's looking really good, and I see some wonderful Black women who are coming through, and I hope that they all get the opportunities, because I can see it's in their bones. They are radio people in their bones.
Great, such a wonderful optimistic note on which to end. We could chat for longer if we had more time, but we don't have more time. Thanks for including me, Sakina. I've really enjoyed it. Let me hand things back to you.
Well, it's actually David's session, Tate John, but great seeing you, and David as well. And yeah, it's exciting. It always is. And we are optimistic. As I say, David, yeah, I see the dark clouds, but as I said, I don't think it's insurmountable. I think there's a lot that can be done, but we shouldn't shy away from the real issues confronting us in the sector at the moment.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you've articulated them as clearly as you have, Sakina. Thank you very much. I've got to say, I did not know that John Perlman was going to come on and ask me questions, unless I've missed the email somewhere, but it was an absolute delight, John. It felt a bit weird being interviewed by you. I have to say, I'm never the one who's being interviewed. So it was an absolute pleasure. And it's always a pleasure chatting to you, John. And Sakina, it was a rare joy. I've absolutely loved chatting to you, and I don't see enough of you. Thank you so much for your time. And John, thank you for such lovely questions, even though, my God, I have hard. I see that somebody is saying we need a book from me. Yeah. A book from Sakina. I think that we can do that as well. We can have the book from Sakina. I think let's wrap it all up. Thank you very much to Sakina Kamwendo, who's got to go and do a radio show now. Am I right?
29 minutes. 29 minutes. And and Tate John, just as a parting shot, talking about preparation. Yeah, I tell you, but that's a story for another day. Maybe next year, Radio Days, we'll talk about producers and how we put it all together. Yeah.
Good one. Thank you, Sakina. Thank you, John.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And to everybody, if you come in late to this, don't forget, we've got the podcast. It will be available on radiodaysafrica.co.za. Thank you to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Media Program, Sub-Sahara Africa, the NAB Media Heads 360, Wise Buddha Jingles, US Embassy in Pretoria, RCS Sound Software, Iono FM, Samro, podnews.net, and of course, the inimitable, incomparable Tim's uncle. Goodbye.
Thank you for joining this Radio Days Africa audio amplified session. For highlights, podcasts, and more, visit radiodaysafrica.co.za.